Locking endgame content behind some sort of level barrier is nothing new to gaming. However, it would be something new to Space Marine 2, and there's plenty of people that fall on both sides of the argument. Me personally, I am so far on the middle of the fence that the board is truthfully running right down the center of my ass crack, and I am just begging for somebody to pull me to one side or the other. But that is going to be our topic for today, is does Space Marine 2 need some sort of level requirement for its end game content? Now, one thing I want to throw out right from the get-go is I've seen a lot of people pose a bunch of different suggestions online as to how this would be implemented, and there's a lot of different variations and nuance to all that. However, just for the sake of time and to keep everything streamlined, we're just going to say that endgame content is anything that can be played on absolute difficulty. So the absolute difficulty itself within operations, hard mode whenever it comes to siege, and also the hard stratagems. Also, the other thing that I want to say is that we're going to work under the presumption that since it is endgame content, we're going to treat it as such and require that players be max ranked within the game. So prestige level 4, prestige 4, level 25, and if you want to do any of that content, that's what you have to hit. So, like I said, I personally am on the fence about this just because I feel that there's a lot of pretty fair and reasonable arguments on both sides of the aisle, but it is something that I do see a growing amount of the community requests towards saber. And most of this, I honestly understand where it's coming from. So today, we're going to try and break down what I personally feel are some of the better arguments from both sides of the aisle and just kind of go through them and see if maybe there is a happy middle ground, or if there is any sort of common ground actually as to what the majority of the community would like to see. So we're going to start off first kind of covering the side of players that do not want to see Space Marine 2 have some sort of level cap requirement for its endgame content. And I'll be honest with you, I do have a little bit of a bias when it comes to this particular side, and that's mostly because a lot of the friends that I play with, they maybe haven't hit max prestige, or they've had to go back and start up a new account because they switched over from Xbox to PC. So the first thing that I want to throw out is the time constraints that it takes for players to get from just regular 25 all the way up to prestige 4. Is it doable? Yes. Does it take some time? Yes. But for a lot of players out there, there's potentially other games that they would rather be enjoying, and they don't want to dedicate all of their time strictly to Space Marine 2. Also, there is a large amount of the population that plays this game that are a little bit older, so the chance of them having other responsibilities going on in life, I feel, is definitely going to be much higher than maybe some other gaming communities out there. And so overall, people may just not have the amount of free time that they would like to have in order to go from level 25 up to prestige 4. Again, this is something that I totally get, because for me personally, one of my cousins, this is kind of the boat that he's in. He's not able to hop on all the time. When he does, we'll mix it up with a bunch of different games. And for him, it's just nice that if we ever do want to hop on Space Marine 2, he's got a character that's already hit 25. He has all the weapons that he personally likes to use finished out, but he just doesn't play it enough to the point where grinding away through different prestiges or maxing out every single weapon of the game is necessarily feasible for him, because like I said, there's just other games that we want to do. And I'm also sure that there are plenty of others within the community that feel the same sentiment. Now, the other thing that I want to throw out too on this side of the argument is technically Absolute was released before we had the prestige system. So currently, yes, we do have the ability to prestige. However, that wasn't always true, especially if you're a newer player. At one point, once you hit 25, that was it. That was the cap. And this is also around the same time frame that Absolute was first introduced into Space Marine 2. So a lot of players, including myself, without having prestige, were able to go through, complete all the different operations that the game has to offer, or at least at that point in time, on absolute. So there are plenty of players out there who maybe aren't at max prestige level 25, but do have the skills to complete that particular difficulty. Now, the other thing that I want to throw out too is the prestige system in and of itself isn't necessarily a good indicator of skill. Rather, it's just time played in the game. So a lot of you would probably be familiar with the Call of Duty franchise, and I'm sure you can know that there's plenty of players out there who have been able to hit max prestige. However, whenever you see them in a lobby, it looks like they're trying to play on a Nintendo 64 controller or something like that, because they just have no idea what's going on. And that's honestly the truth too when it comes to the prestige system in Space Marine 2. All you have to do is play the game, and if you play it long enough, you will eventually hit max prestige in it. It is entirely plausible, however I do feel unlikely, but somebody could play on minimal difficulty, and as long as they invested enough time, they would go from level 1 all the way to maxing out their current class or whatever it is that they were working on. Also, with the data refinement center, again, you could have somebody who has never touched anything above, we'll just keep it to minimal, and they could have complete relic tier weapons and everything else with everything maxed out. So this is just something to keep in mind, that again, the prestige system in this game, it's very similar to other games where, like within Call of Duty, and we're just going to use the classic MW2, kind of the peak of that franchise, but you could hit prestige 10, max rank of 70, and all you'd have to do is get 1 kill per game. Would it take you an absolute grind to get to the end game for that? Yeah, it would, but it was entirely possible, and you would still carry the same rank as somebody who was dropping a nuke every single game. Now, on the topic of prestige, that's going to bring me over to the prestige perks. Now, don't get me wrong, all of them, they are extremely helpful, and I do recommend that if you have the time, definitely look into prestiging, because sometimes it can really help cover down on some of the weaknesses with some of the classes. For example, and I cannot remember the perk name for the life of me off the top of my head, but looking at the assault class, typically whenever I would play that class, anytime I would jump up in the air, there was always a chance that, hey, I might get turned into a glorified clay pigeon. However, there is a prestige perk that actually does specifically remedy that issue and makes you invincible, or rather invulnerable, for 2 seconds while you're doing your charge up in the air, and it's something that completely nullifies a weakness to that specific class. All that being said though, again, none of these perks I feel are absolutely to have perks set on your class to succeed at the highest levels of gameplay. They're definitely going to help, but they're not going to be a deal breaker. Again, there are some that are more viable than others, but a lot of times, and again, people were able to complete absolute without those extra perks attached. So in terms of arguments as to against locking the game behind some sort of level requirement, personally, I feel that those are the strongest ones. Just the fact that, hey, people may not have a whole lot of time, or maybe they have other responsibilities going on that they can't necessarily go through, sit down, max out every class right away, but they do have the potential skill level to play on those difficulties. Now, in terms of the players that do want to see a level lock, and I will say, after this week's particular hard weekly stratagem, I do kind of find myself slowly drifting over this way, because just saying, there's no reason it should have taken me this long to beat it, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, nor am I saying that I'm a perfect player, but I have just constantly failed it, and it's something that should be a walk in the park, and a lot of it comes back to I'm just playing with teammates that have no reason to be playing at this difficulty. So, real quick, I understand that a lot of the points I may bring up here, they may be counterintuitive, but just kind of think of this as the devil's advocate portion of it. So, in terms of the prestige system, yes, while it may not directly indicate that a player is immediately better than someone who is at a lower level, What it does represent, though, is somebody has put a fair bit of time into the game and that particular class, that it's more than likely reasonable to expect that not only will they be a better player, but they're also going to have a better idea of how to play their particular class. For example, we'll use the tactical and one of its team perks that allows you to regen grenades. A lot of the times, whenever I'm popping into operations, more than likely, if I'm playing somebody or playing with somebody who's max rank, rather, they're probably going to have the equipment regeneration perk equipped. However, whenever I'm playing with lower level players, and again, we're just going to keep this right with the tactical just for the sake of argument, a lot of times I'll see them running perks such as focus fire, just because they see that immediate slight buff to their range damage. Now, while that may sound nice in theory, ultimately when you are on these higher levels of gameplay, you're going to get a lot more out of running certain perks. And I think that the players who oftentimes are putting more time into the game and have taken the time to go through and really learn and fine-tune their personal playing mechanics for each class, they are going to have a better understanding of how to run each class in its most optimal way. The other thing too that I want to throw out is, again, if somebody's prestige 4, level 25, odds are you're not probably going to have to worry about them bringing in under-leveled weapons and equipment into whatever particular operation that you're playing. Unfortunately, that has been something that I've been seeing, is a lot of particular players. So real quick, the weekly hard stratagem is just the Fall of Atreus. Really doesn't have any negative damage modifiers other than the Assault or Vanguard. But I have noticed a couple times I've caught players trying to run the Heavy Flamer and just the regular Flamer that you see on the tactical, thinking, hey, as long as I hurry up and complete this, I'll have it up to Relic tier and then I'll be good to go. Personally, I just don't think that that's the spot to be doing it in. And again, if you're playing with somebody who is max rank, odds are they're probably going to have all their gear leveled up, or they're at least going to have the know-how, or rather just the common sense that, hey, if you're playing on this difficulty, probably not best to try and rank up all your stuff here. Can it be done? Of course. It 100% can be, but you're going to run into a lot more issues. Now, the other thing that I want to throw out is, while yes, Absolute did exist during a time when Prestige perks did not, I think it's also completely fair to throw out that Absolute, the difficulty in and of itself, has gone through some adjustments since the launch and the Prestige system being added. One of the big things to throw out is, originally, whenever Absolute launched, you would still only get one potential Terminus enemy, and really it just kind of played more like the updated variant of Lethal, except you would get one extra Extremist. Other than that, there really wasn't a whole lot of difference. A lot of people just kind of felt that it was Lethal Plus, because there wasn't really a huge difference going back and forth between the two difficulties. However, at this point, we now run the option that you could see multiple Terminus enemies, plus you're going to see a greater number of Extremists spawn, plus they will spawn in alongside the Terminus enemies as well. And for players that maybe haven't mastered a lot of the very simple mechanics to the game, it can very easily get overwhelming rather quickly. And honestly, at times it can get overwhelming even for players that are really good at the game. And I think that's just something that I want to throw out, is a lot of times people do kind of say, you know, hey, this particular difficulty, it existed at one point, I was able to complete it back then, but just be aware that it's not the same Absolute that we had to start out with. Kind of like Lethal, where there was the whole setup, I've talked about it before, where you had to stick close by your teammates, and if you didn't, you couldn't regain contested health or your armor pieces back. And Absolute has, again, seen a very similar change in its difficulty. Now, the other thing that I want to throw out too, and this is one that As you could probably tell, it is kind of hitting home right now, but that is just players constantly having to go back through and grind out operations and eventually hope that they run into a player base that is good enough to where they're actually going to be able to complete the operation. Again, sometimes I feel people get a little too worked up over stuff, but I get it. After sitting at the Fall of Atreus, making it to the end 2 or 3 times in a row just to kind of go down at the last level because somebody wasn't playing their part, I get how that's frustrating, because a lot of the operations in here, it's not stuff that's just straightforward. It's going to take you 5 minutes, and if you die, who cares? Sometimes it can take, half an hour, 45 minutes to make it to the end of an operation. And if you do that just 2 or 3 times, hey, there's almost 2.5, 3 hours of your evening gone. And if you're somebody who only has limited time to play, that can totally get frustrating. Again, locking the content behind a level isn't necessarily going to 100% remedy that, but I do think that most of the players who have hit max prestige in this game, I think it's fair to say, on average, they do tend to be better. But those are just kind of my personal thoughts on the situation. Again, I don't think there's really a right or wrong answer to it. That's why I kind of find myself sitting so firmly on the middle of the discussion. But I am open to hearing from you all what your personal thoughts are, maybe what some of your personal experiences would be, or if there's just a nice common middle ground that maybe everyone could come to, as to, hey, we understand there's frustrations on the sweaty kids end, and there's also people who are able to play that sweaty content. Is there a way that we can make both sides happy? And that's really just the question that I have. Feel free to throw out your comments, your opinions down in the comment section below. Just try and keep it respectful, because again, there are very good people on both sides. Unfortunately, like most things, a lot of times the assholes online tend to be the worst examples of both sides, but let's try to have a fruitful discussion. Fruitful discussion. There we go. Sorry, it's been a long couple of weeks, but as always, thank you all for watching, and we will catch you next time.